Hello, my name is John Desnoyers-Stewart. I'm a PhD student and artist researcher at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. And today I'm going to be talking to you about remixing social realities in Body Remixer, particularly the challenges and opportunities that we saw arise from developing this installation. So Body Remixer is an immersive mixed reality installation that arose from the question, how can we activate the body as a site for social exchange in XR? And what I mean by activating the body is using virtual reality in order to expand upon the body in some way that makes it the focal point of the installation for the immersants. So each immersant's experience becomes centered around the bodies of the others that surround them, allowing them to interact through the installation. So you can see an online version of Body Remixer here at Laval Virtual 2020, and it will also be shown at Laval Virtual's Recto Verso in 2021 in Laval, assuming everything gets back to normal by then. But for the meantime, I just wanted to show you a short clip so you have a better idea of the installation that I'm talking about. Body Remixer is an immersive installation designed to connect people through their bodies and movement. The system uses a Kinect to track bodies, transforming them into ethereal auras in the virtual experience. The visuals are displayed on virtual reality headsets and projection screens that act like mirrors of the virtual space. The experience begins from the moment onlookers notice the installation from afar. They can watch others play and interact with the piece, becoming spectators of an impromptu performance and entering whenever they desire. Upon entering the active space, immersants see their ethereal reflection fade into existence in the projection. Particles swarm around their body, appearing as a kind of virtual aura. The particles respond to their movement, encouraging them to play and experiment. Immersants can put on the headset and find themselves surrounded by the virtual space seen in the mirror projections. Their body and those around them are transformed into auras of energetic particles, each with their own color. The identities of friends, strangers, and oneself become blurred together. Seeking to understand this new reality, immersants reach out towards these strange bodies. Another person reaches back to them in response, and as their hands make contact, they find their aura bodies suddenly connected. Particles fly between their bodies, breaking the previously clear boundary, uniting them and creating a sense of connection. Connected, the immersants hear a faint drum beat. Through their shared movement, they discover that they can control the loudness of the drums. Moving in response to one another further strengthens their connection. By touching both hands together, immersants swap their bodies. They see their partner's aura superimposed onto their own, reinforcing the similarities and discrepancies between them and drawing their attention towards each other. Through this shared aesthetic experience, Body Remixer activates bodies and mediates social norms. A truly social VR experience for genuine connection. My artwork, including Body Remixer, really responds to this quote from an article by N. Catherine Hales. We can see, hear, feel, and interact with virtual worlds only because we are embodied. So my work tries to focus on this point of embodiment, and using that in order to create an experience that centers around the body. This is because we cannot leave the body behind when we go into virtual reality. Our experience is formed through bodily perceptions. When we go into a virtual reality experience that only gives us controllers for hands and a floating point of view and empty space, this doesn't correspond to our actual experience. We still feel our body's presence. We still feel the gravity pulling through that body, even when we are presented with visuals of floating through space. So these experiences that do not acknowledge their reality create conflict, which Maury calls the bifurcated self, a body that is split between two realities, the virtual and the actual reality. So while the eyes and ears might be partially present in the virtual space, the hands, the sensations throughout the rest of the body are still stuck in actual space. And when these align, we get a a positive experience, but when they don't, we get a conflicting experience that prevents us from fully engaging with the virtual experience. So by aligning the experience to the body's reality, we can create new possibilities. Then the virtual and actual space are united into one. So aligning the senses unifies the virtual and actual experience into one, allowing us to activate and expand upon real objects, bodies, and spaces, rather than seeking to replace them. So instead of trying to take a person out of the space that they're actually in and hide all the people around them, this approach takes those objects, bodies, and spaces that surround them and expand upon them through virtual reality in order to alter the way that we see them. And so how we do this and why we do it, we're activating bodies in order to remix social realities. So we're trying to alter the social norms and the normal social interaction that would happen between strangers and friends in the space that Body Remixer occupies. So this creates sort of a self-reinforcing feedback loop of virtualization and actualization. And so the virtualization of real bodies grounds the experience and makes it feel more real. By bringing those real bodies in and basing our virtual experience on them, then immersants see the real people around them and their corresponding virtual image. But then taking these virtualized bodies, we can then mediate them. So we can alter their appearance and mediate the perception of those wearing the VR headset. And in particular, what we try to do with Body Remixer is we try to focus the immersants on aspects of the body that they wouldn't normally pay attention to. So we remove the superficial characteristics of appearance, and instead of allowing them to see identifying characteristics such as gender and race and so on that might create prejudice, we try to present this sort of neutral aura body in hopes that this will allow people to interact in a different way, free of the gaze of others, but also free of their own preconceived notions of those others that surround them. And this, another thing we try to do is to mediate and to sort of confuse that sense of identity so that they attribute how they feel about those that they know around them to those that they don't, and to kind of create a common sense of social reality or sort of a common social identity. And in doing this, we hope to create connection. And because the connections that are happening in virtual reality are happening with real people, then these experiences become actualized back out of the virtual reality experience. So because the virtual bodies make the experience feel more real, and because the experience is more real, not only are the bodies made virtual, but the virtual bodies and the virtual experiences are made real. So in this way, XR affords a lot of new artistic possibilities, but in particular, what we were interested in with Body Remixer is the capacity to mediate perception in combination with the activation and expansion of objects, bodies, and spaces in order to alter social realities. So a problem with the current understanding of virtual reality is that it's a tool for reproducing reality. We can see this in the very venue that we're in today, where to create a realistic conference space that's modeled on what a real conference feels like. We don't really take advantage of the fact that we're all free of those physical constraints, or that our physical constraints don't correspond to the physical space that's represented here. So a problem that we run into when we focus on reproducing reality is that our constraints limit our capability, because of course the constraints of the technology that we're using are getting in the way of reproducing reality, because we're never quite going to be there. We're always going to be chasing this idealistic improvement that we've been chasing for the past 30, 40 years. And so then this, of course, produces results that are realistic, not real, but realistic, but very uncanny. And they almost become more and more uncanny as we get closer and closer to realism. And so then we end up with avatars and models which don't acknowledge their virtual existence, but seek to hide it. And in doing so, they reinforce their lack of realism. And finally, we end up with a virtual reality that is mimetic, and one that just copies the reality that we already have access to. And sure, it does allow us to travel in ways that we couldn't normally, as it is right now, enabling us to all attend this Laval virtual conference from our own homes. But it doesn't produce a new reality. It doesn't expand upon the reality that we already have. In producing Body Remixer, as well as other virtual reality installations, I focus on instead acknowledging virtuality. In this, we try to create an installation which doesn't make any attempts at reproducing reality. It's grounded in the reality that surrounds it, but it acknowledges the fact that it's virtual. And through this, instead, now the constraints fuel creativity. As we respond to the sensor's limitations, we create visuals that work within the boundaries of those sensors rather than trying to exceed them. And the form of the installation takes on a form informed by those sensors. We end up with visuals that are abstract, but believable. So by avoiding an attempt to create realism, we don't end up with realistic visuals, but we also, because we're acknowledging that they're virtual, we make them more believable because we are acknowledging rather than trying to hide their virtuality. And so I think when we do that, we get experiences that are less realistic, but more real in that virtual space. And we get products which are generative rather than mimetic. So we can create new realities that don't have to conform to the rules of our own reality beyond the body that they have to be experienced through. Combining the acknowledgement of virtuality with the acknowledgement of the immersence reality, we end up with an approach that I call abstracting reality. And this approach overcomes the constraints of our sensors and our technology by working within their limitations and by using those as creative inspiration. And that allows us to go beyond the limitations of the body, to root our experiences in the body, but then expand outward from there. And importantly, it connects our actual experience to our virtual one. As our reality becomes altered through this mediated form of perception. So another thing we have to contend with in virtual reality is this misnomer that vision is the dominant sense. As I said before, the only way we can experience these virtual experiences is through the body. And of course, embodiment multisensory. So we can't focus on any one sense, but instead need to focus on the unification of all of the senses into a single cohesive experience. So in Body Remixer in particular, we are focusing quite a lot on touch and making an experience that sees touch as equally important as vision or audio or any other sense. And in this way, we seek to connect people through touch because it seems to be the sense. If there is a most important sense for connection, it seems to be touch. And so we use this connection through touch to connect the immersant to their virtual body, to the experience, and to each other. We want to connect the immersant to others in their experience by touching each other's hands. But through this act of reaching out and touching another in virtual reality, in seeing that coincide with the visuals of reaching out and the alignment between these senses helps to connect the immersant to their own virtual body. Because of course, they can then associate that movement and that touch to these virtual particles that in reality, it seems very strange to be able to embody. And beyond this, they can connect to the experience through that connection to their own virtual body. And by connecting more to the experience, they connect more to each other. So Body Remixer is both a living artwork and a research space. It's a living artwork in the fact that we continue to improve it and iterate upon it between installations and exhibitions to take into account the things we learned from the previous installation in the next one. So we don't just treat it as a one-off and a singular entity, but something that evolves over time. And we do this by treating it as a research space because we know that in developing this, we know that we don't know exactly how it will be experienced. So we have to treat the installation as an experiment and observe the reactions and the behavior of those who interact with it so that we can refine it in order to encourage the behavior and interaction that we hope to encourage, as well as to learn about ones which might arise that we didn't expect, that might be even better than what we had hoped for. And so, for example, we saw with Body Remixer in its first installation that when wearing the headset, people seem to want to reach out to touch those virtual bodies that they see around them. And so this concept that we had originally had about encouraging connection through touch was much more viable than we had expected because we thought maybe they would only touch through the high five gesture. But they also began to interact with one another and to create new connections in this way. And this also showed us that being in different virtual spaces, one wearing a headset and one not, those immersants also seem to be in different social spaces. And so this has allowed us to reflect on how we can design Body Remixer to allow participants to understand the same social norms across that divide, and to further design the installation in a way that encourages immersants to feel comfortable interacting with one another in a new way. And I think this can also be said for any virtual reality experience, that it's a living thing that needs to continuously be rethought as we observe it and its effects in reality, so that we can get rid of the negative things that have come up that we don't expect, and to encourage the positive aspects that we are trying to get out of it, and to realize that we don't really know a whole lot about virtual reality yet. There's a lot of research, a lot of interest in it right now, but a lot of the current development is based on some flawed assumptions about things such as presence. So from the development of Body Remixer, I think there are a few essential considerations for XR installations. First off, the immersant's embodied experience is essential to any XR installation. Because the immersant perceives the experience through their body, we need to think of that experience in terms of the body, not in terms of the visuals or the audio, but in terms of the body as a whole. Another essential consideration is to focus on uniting parallel realities. So rather than trying to take the immersant and rip them out of their real world and throw them into a totally different virtual one, we need to start with one that is grounded in their reality so that they can then expand from there. And most importantly, I think something that is very often missed in a lot of XR installations is the social context, both in VR and outside of it. A lot of XR experiences right now are very isolated and designed around one person. And while that person is in the experience, they're sort of expected to have this experience on their own. These experiences don't account for the people who are standing around watching them, or how they might interact with those who aren't wearing the headset. And so a tool that we found was very useful in acknowledging all three of these considerations is the virtual mirror. And a virtual mirror is a mirror that is co-located both in virtual reality and as a projection in the actual reality of the installation. By having this virtual mirror present, we can facilitate embodiment, as the immersant wearing the headset can see their body in virtual reality through the mirror. Because of course we don't look down very often. We can unite the parallel realities of the virtual and actual space, as the mirror reflects a combination of the two and allows both the headset wearer and those around them to see a reflection of that space. And in that way, it also connects outsiders to the immersant, allowing them to see what the immersant is seeing in a limited sense, and also allowing them to interact with the immersant and to orient themselves spatially in the virtual space so that they can connect without a headset. So in wrapping up, I just wanted to discuss how the current pandemic has affected my ongoing creative work. Right now, we've seen a sudden shift to virtual spaces. And in some ways, we've been fortunate because we've never had this level of access to telepresent technology. So through this sudden virtualization in the era of COVID-19, we've revealed a lot of contradictory challenges and opportunities. Some of the opportunities we've seen is that there are a lot of jobs that can be done from home. There are a lot of people who don't need to be commuting. And we can really reduce our impact on the environment by being more reasonable about allowing remote working opportunities where possible. But we've also seen a lot of challenges. Anyone who's been in any teleconference, and all of you using this platform right now, realize the challenges presented by attempting to communicate over a virtual platform. But we've been fortunate because telepresence has allowed us some connection. I think a lot of us would prefer to be here in person in Laval to be able to connect with one another, but at least we can still have this conference. That said, I think it's pretty clear that we're missing far too much bandwidth. There's a lot, even with a virtual reality, an avatar, some spatial sense with the visuals and audio, we're missing a lot of communication, a lot of aspects of communication that are embodied and only present when we're co-present. And so because of that, my response to the current pandemic is to reinforce my stance that co-presence remains essential. Because I think that once this is all over, we're going to really want to get together, to connect, to be in the same space. No matter how much we develop the telepresent technology and get over the problems that we're having right now, I think it will always remain essential to just be with each other, to be in the same space. So I think that we need to continue to develop the technology and these experiences with a focus on supporting genuine physical connections rather than seeking to replace them. So when we use these telepresent platforms, or when we use co-present platforms, that they're not trying to replace connections that we would have outside of them, but rather to support those, whether they're temporary supports like we need right now, or whether they're long-term supports that help us to keep connections when we have to be far apart from one another. So I hope to continue to develop installations that help bring people together in a time that I think we're going to need connection more than ever. So I look forward to the end of this crisis and showing my installation in Laval next year and hopefully bringing people together. Thank you.